Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Green, and I am an independent educational consultant and author, and I work with Howard Green Associates here in Connecticut and in New York City. And I'm pleased to be back with College Week Live. This is one of a number of sessions I've done over the years, and I'm happy to be back. I always enjoy these, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about selective college admissions today, and also to answering your questions. So please keep those in mind, and as you have them, you can submit them. I'll mostly save them until the end of the talk during the hour here. I've spoken in the past couple of years a lot about trends in admissions, and I'm going to do a little bit of that today. But I'm mostly going to spend some time talking about our 10 steps to selective college admissions, which are drawn from our book called Making It into a Top College, which came out with HarperCollins a couple of years back in a second edition. And what I want to do is give you a sense of a plan for selective college admissions and talk a little bit about a timeline, and hopefully that will generate some questions and give you a sense of how to organize the college process. Some of you who are participating might be already into your senior year, others might be in 9th or 10th grade, might have parents there, so I'm going to try to touch a lot of different bases and hope you find most of the information relevant for your situation. So to start off, I just want to touch briefly on some current trends that have been developing in admissions over the last couple of years, and just give you a little bit of sense of what's been going on, and then go to the notion of the 10-step plan as a way for applicants to make sense of the college process and approach it in a more logical and coherent way. So certainly one of the big trends we've talked about is complexity. And that the admissions process today is as complicated and difficult to navigate as it has ever been, even with online applications and everything else. We're finding that students and parents are really stressed out and really confused by the different kinds of processes that you have to go through to apply for public and private colleges today. So it is more complicated. The uncertainty factor is certainly something I've been touching on for quite a while now, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse. When you look at the selective colleges, the odds are getting tougher at many of them, and what that means is a lot of unpredictability. It's uncertain for you as an applicant, it's uncertain for the colleges in terms of trying to enroll good and appropriate students, and we'll talk about why they're using various admission strategies to try to reduce unpredictability, and why you as a candidate are trying to use various strategies to reduce that uncertainty. A third trend is the search for diversity. This is beyond racial, ethnic diversity or affirmative action, but really it's getting at the idea that colleges are searching for all kinds of geographic, first-generation, international diversity, diversity of academic interests, diversity of general background, diversity of extracurricular activities in the candidates that they're selecting. So colleges are building a diverse class of qualified students. You as a student may also want to be thinking about diversity as you build your college list, and I'll talk more about that. Generosity, we are seeing record high costs in terms of the sticker prices at most colleges, public and private. At the same time, huge need-based and merit-based aid offers are available. So there is a lot of aid out there, both scholarship aid and need-based aid. I'll talk a little more about both of those. But the general theme you'll hear from me is not to let cost limit your options as you set out to build your college list. Alacrity, meaning speed. The process is starting earlier than ever, as indicated by if you are a 9th or a 10th grader and listening to this, you're turning on the radar a lot earlier than your parents might have, or even folks would have 5 or 6 or 10 years ago. It is starting earlier. There are a lot of early plans, early admission plans, and other strategies. At the same time, we're seeing more of a marathon to the process, with a lot of decisions being made, both in regular decision as well as waiting lists going very far into the summer after senior year. So another trend I talk a lot about with students when I'm counseling them is to plan early, but be very prepared for a longer process and not to give up, because all kinds of things can happen during the course of senior year. So let me talk a little bit about the 10 steps for selective college admissions. Clearly, most of the points I'm going to be making here are pertinent to selective colleges, and how do admission officers at selective schools make decisions about whom to admit. First of all, we should be clear about what selective means. Most folks will acknowledge that selective means you're able to select from among a very qualified pool of candidates, and you have more qualified candidates than you can enroll in your school. So you have to be selective. In other words, you're not talking about open admission here, and we're generally talking, for those of you interested in selective schools, about colleges that might admit fewer than 50% of their candidates, or even 60 or 70% of candidates. And those can be selective, or in the case of, say, Ivy League level schools, highly selective schools might only admit 5 or 6 or 10% of their applicants. In the face of all this uncertainty, in the face of the competition, if you're looking to get into selective schools, the odds here in terms of your process as an applicant are to improve your odds of admission at a group of schools of a variety of levels of selectivity, from more to less selective, all of which could be a good fit for you. That is certainly the overriding principle here. It's not trophy hunting, so to speak. The idea is to find schools that are a good fit for you, to make sure you have a diversity of selectivity and type on your list, but at each of the schools you apply to, they could be a good fit. So we've been working on a 10-step plan for quite a long time for college admissions, really going way back into the early 1970s, and over time have revised and expanded that. But let me go through the 10 steps, hopefully give you a sense of how to organize the process. And as I said, as questions come up, please keep them in mind or type them into the screen, and I will get to them along the way. They could be general questions, things you'd like me to get further into, or it could be a question related to your own personal circumstances. So step one here is getting to know selective colleges and their admissions requirements and procedures. You need to spend time learning about admission requirements and plans. Really focus, for the most part, on your own strengths, your own goals, your own interests. Colleges vary in terms of what they require, whether those are particular courses, particular tests. Do they have specific admission requirements or plans? Do they have auditions or other things for Bachelor of Fine Arts programs? If you're early years, if you're a 10th grader, 11th grader, you really have time here to think about learning about the admission process and learning about some specific things that match your goals, your strengths and interests. The idea during high school is to at least meet those admission requirements or potentially exceed those requirements. The more selective the college, the more likely they are to admit more of the students who exceed their requirements. So they might recommend 2 years of a foreign language, but if you have 3 or 4, that could help. You might only require 2 years of science, but if you have 3 or 4, that can help. One thing you can do is to go to college websites and look at the entering class profile for last year. And that will typically, depending on the school, break out quite clearly where candidates are coming from, what their average test scores are, their GPA, other special talents, things they bring to the table. And you really want to spend some time looking at those class profiles and seeing, do I fit in here? Does this seem like a school where I might be a good match? The other thing you can do is start to get to know the different admission plans and strategies. And I'll talk a little more about that, but that could be early decision, early action, priority deadlines, early notification plans, early decision round 2. Some schools have early action, some schools have restrictive early action. There are a lot of different things out there, which gets to my early point about this being a more complicated process. But get to know those plans. They may change. If you're a 9th grader looking ahead, in 2 or 3 years, you might see some changes. But do start to get a sense of, how does this whole thing work? Okay, so step 1 is getting to know the colleges, getting to know the procedures for admissions and what you're going to need to do, gather the right materials together at the same time. The second step, which is really an ongoing thing, and you may have begun this early on in middle school, early high school. Your school might give you certain career building and personality type assessments to help you determine your strengths. This is a process of trying to figure out what are your skills, your interests, your abilities, and your preferences. You may not know exactly what you want to do with your life, but you probably have a very good sense of what you're good at, what you'd like to do, what are your preferred styles of learning. Are you going to be good in a lecture hall? Do you like to be participatory? Are you good with English and humanities areas? Do you prefer maths and sciences? This is an ongoing process for you to think about who you are and what you're going to be good at. How do you compare to your peers at your school? Start to get a sense, not in a competitive way, but to get a sense of, are you at the top of your class? Are you at the bottom of your class? Are you in the middle of your class? Are you going to stand out relative to your students that are at your school and your class? That's one of the things that selective colleges are looking at, is who are you relative, let's say in context, compared to your peers? How might you compare to the national or even international today applicant pool, particularly when you're looking at your individual interests? You might be a pretty good scientist in your school. How do you think you might compare to the larger pool nationally or internationally in terms of top-level science or math scores, for example? So you also want to be thinking about the broader context of applicants that a college is going to be looking at. One thing you can do over time is talk to your parents, talk to advisors, teachers, friends, ask others for help in reflecting on what your strengths are, how good you are with things, where you might fit as an athlete, where you might fit as a musician. The people to talk to are the people that see you in action. So if you're thinking, am I good enough to study art in college or architecture, talk to your art teachers and see whether they think that you are developing college level and professional level abilities, and is that a good career path for you, for example. So determining your strengths is really an ongoing task. It's something that we all do really through our whole life, through our whole career. But once you know and get a better sense of your strengths, your interests, your abilities, that's going to help you shape your college list. Step 3, and this is really the core of the whole college decision process in most schools, is your program. In other words, follow a demanding curriculum. The #1 predictor of your college success is a strong academic program in high school. So if you're determined to enroll in a selective college, you really should take the majority of the hardest classes that your school offers and that you think you can handle comfortably while working at a good level. It's easy to say, oh, you should take AP everything, or you should take advanced everything. That usually doesn't work for most students. Based on your interests, based on your strengths, you should be challenging yourself through all 4 years of high school, if you can, to take a demanding program that you can still handle reasonably well. Particularly 11th, 12th grade, and if you've had a slow start in 9th and 10th grade, that's okay. The idea is to build up toward those more high-profile classes by the last 2 years of high school, again, including senior year. And remember what I said, we're seeing longer decision time frame in many cases, so that your academic program and grade senior year can make a difference for you in the regular or waitlist decision process. It's okay, I call it profiling yourself. It's okay to profile yourself and tailor your academic program based on your interests and strengths. You don't have to take the most advanced in everything, but you should try to push up in the areas where you feel most comfortable and strongest. Or added to that, if you're thinking about a particular academic program, you need to take the more advanced courses that are going to prepare you for that, whether that's math courses and economics for a business program, chemistry, physics, math for an engineering program, computer science for a computer science degree, foreign language for an international relations degree. This is going to help you match up potentially with colleges of interest. It's okay and sometimes important to use summer studies or online studies to add to your academic profile, especially if you're not able to take courses that you want in your high school, or if you'd like to pursue some exploration, a business class, an art class, a music class, while you go through high school and you don't have a chance to try that. You can try it in the summer, or these days increasingly try it online. I worked with a student this year, for example, who took a summer course in pre-calculus so that he could advance to calculus as his senior year, because he's interested in applying to engineering schools, and that's something that they're going to be looking at carefully. I would say that the most appealing students to many colleges these days are those who have developed a certain academic area of interest or theme that might fit with the college that they're looking at. Again, this is particularly true with the most selective schools, and I would say also with the larger, mid to larger size universities as opposed to the small colleges. What you want to do, again, is find the right balance for you so you can pursue a strong program through high school without getting overwhelmed. Step 4 is making standardized tests work for you. A lot of discussion going on with standardized testing. I don't want to get too bogged down in it with the new SAT coming out for those who are in the class of 2017, some changes to the ACT and the PSAT. The idea here is be prepared to meet the entrance tests and other requirements of the schools that you're looking at. You should be thinking as early as 9th or 10th grade about taking SAT subject tests in areas that might fit with your curriculum or match with your pursuits in college. Most students I work with are trying both SAT and ACT, or at least taking some diagnostic testing to figure out which will work better for them. Many, if not, I'd say most schools that require SAT subject tests will typically take the ACT in place of both the SAT and SAT subject tests, and it's really only a handful of schools, like a Dartmouth, for example, that don't allow that, and this is changing every year. But you want to make sure you're fulfilling and preparing for standardized testing. If you're an international student, a student whose first language is not English, you most likely should be taking the TOEFL or the IELTS test or trying both. Most schools will make it very clear what their base level expectations are for a TOEFL or IELTS score. AP scores, it's another way to demonstrate mastery of content. In most cases, you do need to take the AP course, but I've had students take the AP exam after a demanding English class, after trying to self-study for psychology or other areas that their school might not offer. But the APs are another content-rich test to look at. Students who are in an A-level IB program won't have those final results available until after they've applied to US colleges, but the predicted scores can help. Absolutely, you can and should prepare for standardized testing. It's, of course, one of the critiques of the SAT or ACT is that you can prep for them, you can improve your scores, you can work on your own. There are a lot of free materials available. Additionally, this year the College Board is officially going into partnership with Khan Academy online. You can do free online stuff there, or you can do intensive classes or one-on-one tutoring. There's no doubt from my experience that working on these tests over a longer period of time, typically beginning sometime in the summer before or the fall of junior year, is going to help you get your best scores by the time you apply. So standardized testing, probably one of the most challenging areas for the whole college process. More important at some schools, particularly those that are the most selective and the larger ones. At the same time, we have a lot of schools that have gone test optional. Wake Forest and Holy Cross and Bates and Bryn Mawr recently and Bowdoin and Franklin and Marshall. There are a ton of really good schools out there that are test optional. If you feel that your program, your academics are a lot stronger than your test scores suggest, you might want to be thinking about having some test optional or test flexible schools on your list. Step 5, excel outside class. This really gets at the idea of developing a passion. The selective colleges, how are they going to make decisions if they're dealing with quite a few well-qualified students who can do the work? So they're selective because they're selecting among a highly qualified group of candidates. They want people that are going to come to campus and contribute in some way to the community. And typically they're going to now differentiate among qualified academic students by thinking in terms of extracurricular activities or co-curricular contributions, music, arts, athletics, community service, student leadership, writers, and so on. This is what the diversity of the class is what is going to make a selective college an interesting place to be, and probably one of the main reasons that you want to be there. So think about what your strengths are, to go back to the earlier step, and that's where you want to spend most of your time. Much better to excel and go deep in a couple of areas or even one area than to really spread yourself out too thin and be involved in too many things without really making a big difference. And that's a question I get a lot. Shouldn't I add more and more and more activities? The fact is most colleges are saying, stop, just do the couple of things that you really like to do and tell us about it, because that's where you make a bigger contribution. Look for outlets in school, out of school, in the community. If your school doesn't have a club that you're interested in, try to start one. If you can't pursue a sport you're good at in school, that's fine. You can do it in the summer, you can do it outside, but try to pursue the things that you like to do. Typically 9th, 10th grade, particularly going to 11th grade, a lot of times students need to drop activities. and that's also okay. Many times parents and students will ask me, is it okay, I don't like football that much anymore, but if I drop it junior year, that's going to quote unquote look bad that you're not doing a sport or that you stopped something that you've been doing. It's quite the opposite. If you found something else you'd like to do more and you're really not interested or making a contribution or getting much out of something that you're doing, very much you should think about moving away from activities and moving into others. The rule of thumb here is do what you enjoy, do what you're good at, try to do a lot of it. Don't just join a bunch of clubs and resume build it. It's very transparent to colleges, and they get quite dismayed about students trying to do that. They'd rather see you do things that you're interested in. And energy, the enthusiasm of pursuing things that you like really does come through if you have an interview, certainly during your application writing, and I'll talk a little more about your presentation. So step 5, excel outside of class, is something really you should take to heart all the way through and even before high school. So moving from there, starting to get a little bit more on these next steps into the college process itself. So some of the steps of actually carrying out the college process. Step 6, make the most of campus visits and interviews. Again, another question I get a lot is, isn't it okay if we just don't visit at all and apply to a bunch of schools and we'll go visit the ones you get into? Particularly for internationals, that's a challenge to come over here from wherever you are. But it's also a challenge if you live in Kansas or California or New York and you're trying to go farther away to school. It's hard, it's expensive, and it takes time to get out to visits, but the visits matter a lot. First of all, they're going to help you learn more about the schools, what's right for you. It makes the process quite a bit more concrete and realistic. You may find that you thought you wanted a big, diverse, giant urban school, and that's the last thing where you're going to be comfortable. You may find you thought you wanted a small college out in the woods, and that's not going to fit once you go see a couple. So from a practical standpoint, it's going to help you apply to the right schools. The second thing is there's this so-called demonstrated interest factor at hand here, where colleges, many of them, are looking at whether you came to visit the campus as a sign of interest, and that can be a tipping factor between an admit and a wait list, or a wait list and a rejection. So demonstrating interest, this is one way to do it by visiting, but for me, it's mostly important for yourself to get out there on the road. Many schools do not offer interviews on campus anymore, but you should prepare for them by looking at your colleges, seeing if they offer interviews, and really reading about the programs, the activities they offer that you might want to be talking about, asking about in an interview. Do take an interview quite seriously, even if it's sort of branded an informational or not very evaluative interview. It is a chance for you to make an impression. So take the interviews seriously if you can get them. If you have a special program interest, whatever it is, music, theater, history, English, athletics, try to meet with a representative of those programs on your campus visits. To reassure you, most students do not have highly specialized interests or any clue what they'd like to do in college or with their life. And it's totally fine. I really do find that's the case with most of the students I meet. That you don't really know what you want to do. You're thinking general liberal arts or general business. That's okay. If you do have something that you're pretty interested in, that is the time to think about trying to make a meeting, emailing an instructor, a coach, etc., when you're doing campus visits. All the scheduling these days, almost all of it at least, is done online. I encourage students to take the lead with this as opposed to parents or counselors. You can go to schedule tours, what are called group information sessions, and if they're available, one-on-one interviews beginning typically April to May of junior year and then up to about November of senior year. You can do the interviews. The other stuff you can do as a sophomore. You can do it early junior year in the summer. But well in advance, especially if it's a popular day, Jewish holidays, Columbus weekend, etc., a Saturday morning, go online and make sure you're getting on board and making a good plan because it's quite a ways ahead of time. Okay. One thing I do recommend a lot is visiting clusters of schools together. It could be similar schools. You're visiting 3 or 4 small colleges in the country at the same time. It could be different schools, a large school, a small school, a city school, a country school. But set up a cluster of visits and try to see them together in order to do some comparison, particularly in the early stages when you're trying to, in some ways balance out your list. It's a good idea to get out and see some schools that you can compare and maybe challenge some of your assumptions. Earliest visits I tend to recommend would be summer to mid-fall before or during your junior year. If you're driving through places, et cetera, before then, that's fine. There might be other extenuating circumstances, but for most students, the time to visit is early to mid-fall of junior fall, the winter, the spring of junior year. Most of your visiting through the summer of senior year, and then some wrap-up visits during the early to mid-fall of senior year. It can take that long to really finalize things. Document your visits. Take notes. You do want to make sure that you are not just seeing a bunch of schools and tuning out completely. Take notes on an iPad, take notes in a notebook, whatever works for you, but do take some notes about your visiting, what you liked, what you didn't. Rate them in some fashion. We have some sheets that we use in the book that are visit summary sheets to give you some structure to that. But the idea is you're going to go back to these notes to remind yourself of a lot of things, especially if you do apply to the school and you're doing some writing. Step 7, I'll just spend a little bit of time on. It's something that is done a little bit more visually, but find your place in the class pie charts. As you start to look at some colleges, think about how you might fit into some of the various admission categories that colleges will use. Legacies, as in typically mom or dad graduated from the undergraduate college, although some schools that's broader than that. If you're an athlete, if you're an international student applying to the U.S. or U.S. applying to abroad, for example, special talent, a writer, a scientist, whatever it is, how do you fit into the categories that colleges start to use to divide their class in kind of a pie chart? If you're familiar with that concept, take a circle and divide it up into sections. Typically half the pie chart for the freshman class coming into a college might be made up purely of super strong, really great academically qualified students. And maybe you're that guy or that girl where you're really high up in the academic ladder for a college. The other wedges of the pie might be made up of 10% first-generation applicants and 5% international or 10% international, 5 or 10 or 15% of recruited athletes, and so on down the line. And one thing you can start to think about is, how do I fit this college? Do I match one or another category? Do you represent a special category? Perhaps it's a very strong science and tech-oriented school, but they've been trying to push their humanities coursework. And now you're thinking, well, maybe I'll apply to MIT or Carnegie Mellon or Johns Hopkins as a humanities student because that's my interest, and they have a great program that's really a special category, just as an example. The flip side of that would be applying to a liberal arts college where you might be a very strong engineering sciences student that really is a good fit for that special category program they might have. In other words, what you're trying to do here is just think through what your competitive advantages might be at various schools. You may not have one in particular. In other cases, as you craft your list, you might find that there's some schools that are a really good fit for you, where you really make a difference in a particular niche. Step 8, present yourself in the best light. This is what seniors, rising seniors, should be working on right now. And if you're a junior, think about working ahead next summer. But the presentation process really is wrapping everything up and making your best case for admission with the colleges that you're interested in. How well you present yourself can very much influence the admission decision. If you're academically qualified and you're trying to figure out how's this selective college going to select me, you're trying to give them reasons for why you're a good fit, why you're an interesting, exciting candidate. I think, again, this is particularly true with the smaller to mid-size and more selective schools. Presentation is really key. It very much goes beyond just grades and test scores. Definitely should interview, as I mentioned, wherever you can, but recognize that the written application is much more important in almost every case. Even in the case of schools that offer alumni interviewing, even alumni interviewers would tell you they don't have much influence in the process. It's the written application read by at least 2 readers typically, and often a whole committee, that could make the difference for you. you're going to need to write at least one or more personal statements for every college you're applying to that's a selective school. One of the qualifications or criteria to be a part of the common application system, which is over 500, mostly private colleges and universities and some public ones, one of the criteria is that you do need to have an essay as a college as a requirement. So most students are starting in the summer with their main common application personal statement, which is a 650-word, one of 5 choices essays. And then you're seeing a lot of schools adding on more and more supplemental short and mid and some even long length questions in there. So be very careful to pay attention to each of those essays. They can help you to present yourself, to detail your interests, your strengths, and why a school is a good fit. You should be really spending careful amounts of time on each essay. None of them is a throwaway essay. Each one is going to be important to the college that's requiring it. What admissions people will say, and you may have heard this from others already today and others that you're talking to at schools, is the application itself really can make a difference in terms of how they're viewing the context of your performance academically and otherwise. So this is your opportunity to spend as much time as you want talking about yourself and helping to give the college an understanding of who you are. As I said, pay attention to the Common App and the supplemental questions. Make sure you're doing everything you need to do to have a good, complete application. If you're thinking about submitting supplemental materials, and those could be writing samples, they could be musical pieces, they could be artwork, the main place to start today is a website called slideroom.com, which in most cases the colleges are linking to from inside the Common App. So if you're thinking about submitting any art, particularly art-oriented supplements, this could also include research projects, Vimeo videos, and things like that. Start with looking at slideroom.com. Then from within the Common Application, you can see that the college does or doesn't use SlideRoom as their supplemental material platform. And most of them, I'm finding again this year, do that. Okay, so supplements, you'll see most colleges say, please only send us a supplemental art or music or other kind of material if you really feel it's extraordinary. If it's really a standout level of work. If not, it could really reflect badly on you. In most cases, colleges will bring in qualified faculty to look at supplemental materials. And if it's really poor quality, that could be something that works against you. So make sure you're working with reliable, whether it's photography instructors, theater instructors, music, vocal instructors, to give you honest feedback, getting back to the determining your strengths step, to make sure that this is something you should submit and that it's high enough quality. I want to talk a little bit about financial aid and paying for college. We have a whole book on paying for college, so it's quite a long step and process, but I did want to address it a little bit in terms of planning finances at this juncture. If you're in the younger end of the spectrum here, you want to start planning your finances early. Create what we call a family partnership, where you can talk about expectations, resources that you and or your parents or guardians have for you, whether you're going to be able to pay for any college you want with no problem, whether you're going to need significant financial assistance. Start thinking early on about this. And of course, if you're a parent of a younger child, think about starting to put some money away for college. One of the essential points I make with students is not to let cost limit your options. In other words, don't let the sticker price of a college scare you away. Many of the most expensive colleges have some of the best financial aid packages and provide financial support for 40, 50, 60% or more of the students who are enrolled. Data show that only about a quarter to a third of students actually pay full price at most selective schools. So there's a lot of funding out there, as I mentioned about generosity early on. Don't let the cost, in other words, the sticker price, limit what you're doing. Rather, the plan here is to apply to a diverse mix of colleges, including those that offer only need-based financial aid, which is, in other words, based on your family's ability to pay, and non-need-based or merit assistance. The Ivy League, for example, the 8 Ivy League institutions and others that are similar, only offer need-based aid. They do not offer merit scholarships or athletic scholarships. But if you get in, most of them are among the most generous in terms of providing financial support and less loan support and so on for you. Other schools will provide not only need-based aid, but substantial merit scholarships. And these include a lot of both public and private schools. So these days I'm helping students build a diverse mix of schools that might include, hey, if I get in, it's really expensive, but they have a ton of need-based aid and they help students have a lower net cost of attendance. And then we're thinking about schools where you might be in the top 30 or 40% of that college's applicant pool, and you might be offered a merit scholarship to defray your costs. The third leg of the stool here is to have a financial aid safety school, so to speak. I don't like that language all that much, but what this means is have a school or even a couple on your list that you can pay for without significant debt or financial aid. That could be your state's public flagship institution or another state university. It could be your community college. It could be a junior college. It could be a four-year campus of a state university. Have a school or two that if you get in, it's also a place that you can pay for. Because you want that option come the spring of senior year when you really get down to the nitty-gritty, that you're going to have choices where you can start college and move forward. Know what kind of aid each college offers. This gets back to the first or second step about knowing college requirements. What does that school offer? Do they have merit aid, only need aid? Do they have special procedures, priority deadlines to follow? As you're building your list, your thought list of schools, spend some time not only on the admissions side of the website, but also the financial aid side of the admissions page typically. Most schools are pretty good. They're all supposed to have a net price calculator now. Some of them put it right up front. I think it was on Northwestern's website yesterday, and there it was right up on the financial aid and admissions website. Here's our net price calculator, where you can throw in some ballparks for finances and get a sense of what you're likely to pay if you get into, say, Northwestern in this case. Federal government on the FAFSA website and the College Board also have good more generalized net price calculators, and there's some others around. The net price calculators can give you a general sense in terms of your family circumstances and your own circumstances, what you're likely to pay after grant and or scholarship assistance. And that's what's called gift aid. It's the best kind because you don't have to pay it back. Loans are usually not included in these calculators. Be wary of taking on too much loan debt. I do think personally that some loan debt is fine. The average loan debt is now over $20,000, over 25 I think now, for those who graduate with a four-year degree. Personally, I think that's reasonable for most students given the value of a college degree for your future. $125,000, I think most people would say that's too much loan debt, and it means you're likely incurring unsubsidized loans, private loans, and other things that are really going to be a burden for you and potentially your family. So really be wary as you look at the total cost of what you're paying for college of taking on too much loan debt at all costs. Very few colleges are worth it at all costs to most students. If you look at the college's websites, as I mentioned, you're going to see some priority deadlines for maximum scholarship participation or consideration. You'll see that some schools have named scholarships where you need to apply by a certain date and perhaps do an interview or have an extra essay. And again, these can be well worth it when you look down the road here to go to extra mile to make sure you get things in early. You get maximum consideration for merit scholarships and potentially honors and other programs by doing extra essays, maybe making that extra visit and interview. That can really pay off. And I've seen it time and again with students that have gotten very generous awards. Or if you don't make it all the way down the line, I've had students at the University of Richmond, for example, who've applied for some of their select scholarships and honors programs. And they haven't gotten all the way there, but through doing the process, showing the interest, being very qualified, they've gotten in, or maybe gotten some merit scholarship, if not the whole thing. So plan your finances, make a partnership with as a family. It is important that you work together on this. Every family is different, but it's going to take everyone working together to get this piece done. The last step, step 10, maybe an obvious one, enroll in the right college for you. For those of you considering an early decision commitment, this is something you need to think about now as a senior, for example, and do the analysis that you would do in April as a senior if you were admitted to several schools. So the way the timeline works is you're looking at getting all of your admission decisions in from regular decision by the beginning of April, and you have until May 1 to reply. Or if you've been admitted early action even to a college before then, you do not have to reply until May 1st. So you have a month in the spring to go back and visit or revisit, carefully evaluate a school before you make your decision. If you've gotten an aid award that you feel is insufficient or out of whack, or there's a lot of difference between various schools that offered you aid, you may be able to appeal. Sometimes works, doesn't always work, but it's well worth considering. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But appeals are an important part of that process. If you're waitlisted, which is another major trend I mentioned early on, don't give up. Students do get in off of these enormous wait lists. Don't count them in, and don't count them out, but don't count them up there. Don't count the wait lists out, because you do see them turning over. I have had many students admitted the last couple of years from strong selective schools on the wait list. You do need to make a decision and a commitment by May 1 and move ahead, but you should also pursue the wait list if it's a school you're genuinely interested in. Be flexible. We're seeing, this has been a trend for quite a while, more and more students who are being offered, let's say, a gap year program. Harvard's been doing this a lot. Other schools where they'll say, you can't come this fall, but why don't you take a gap year and come next year? Or Cornell says, go somewhere else, get B's in a accredited college, and you can come here as a guaranteed transfer. Other schools are offering a mid-year entrance offer. I've had this at University of Miami or University of Southern California, for example, have been offering January admission, putting you on a wait list for the fall. Sometimes you don't get into the school you wanted that you applied to in a college, but they give you admission to a different school. So you apply to Syracuse and you don't get into the Newhouse Communications program, but they give you admission into the arts and sciences. You know, be open-minded for options as you get down the line here. Really don't take it too personally if you don't get exactly what you go for. It's a very good idea to be flexible and to think about what are my options and what are the choices being presented and how do they work in the long run for me. Most appealing, again, if you're developing your interests, developing your goals and pursuing them, finding that's having a difference as you enroll down the line and make the connections when you're making your decisions about where to enroll. Just a few takeaway lessons, and I'm definitely going to get you a nice list of questions here I want to get to. The most important thing looking ahead for you is good grades in college prep classes, having a 4-year plan, so do start early, but don't give up through senior year. Don't underestimate yourself or the power to grow over a staircase kind of effect on your transcript over 4 years, but don't overestimate yourself. I work with a lot of highly talented students where we'll say, you know, this is a realistic reach for you to apply to level 1, you know, most competitive colleges. And that's great, you know, so you get on everything you can to be in the ballpark for this or that level of school. But given the uncertainty, you have to be very careful not to overestimate your odds. Be prepared that you may not get in just because of the competition and uncertainty out there. So make sure to apply widely, keep an open mind, make visits, and advocate for yourself to a variety of schools through the admission process. So that's a quick tour through the 10 steps to college. I want to get to some of your questions here. I've got a whole list. Here's a good question. How do I find out what the national applicant pool for my area of interest looks like? That is a great question. You can look at that in a couple of ways. Some of the schools that have specialized programs do separate out, let's say, what the criteria for the engineering program might be versus the criteria for the education school and so on. So that class profile may separate out, okay, if you're applying to the engineering courses, here's generally what the applicants look like, their test scores, the courses, et cetera, how many people are applying, how many people get in. If you look at Columbia University, for example, and look at the engineering versus Columbia College, you can dig down and find out really who are they looking at in both cases, and what tend to be the odds. Sometimes it takes a little digging. Sometimes that's a question you can ask when you're looking at a particular college, is if you apply to this college or this school within the college or university, does it make a difference? Are there any different criteria, different expectations for academics, for test scores, and so on? The other thing, if you're looking at the applicant pool from a particular area, sometimes you can get information from the college about, okay, when we're looking at students from this or that country group, here's what we tend to look at in terms of your curriculum and your preparation. Next question, I've been told not to write about my athletic interest accomplishments in my college essay. How do you communicate about that? That's a tough one. I've gotten that question a lot over the years. It's sort of the white elephant sometimes. If you're thinking about, you know, a major athletic recruiting situation and you want to be a lacrosse player, football player, hockey player, whatever it is, and that's where you spend the large majority of your time, sometimes it's a little odd if you don't write about it at all, because it's so obvious that you spend so much time with it. At the same time, it can also be very cliched to talk about, you know, the best game you ever had, or how important it is for you to play baseball, and it's hard to stand out with that type of essay. So typically, I think first I'd think about what else could you write about, and if you don't write about your sport, are you really missing something in there? Is it just so obvious that you're avoiding the most likely candidate? But if you do write about sports, you have to write about it in a more personal way, in a way that is more unique and not cliched. So trying to make the connections usually between what sports have taught you, how they've played into other things you've been involved with. Sometimes students have written about, for example, coaching their sport to younger students, or traveling with it, or working with you know, their sport in a different capacity than just playing it at a high level. So I wouldn't avoid it altogether. I don't buy into that approach, but I would watch out for the cliches. If you don't write about it, clearly the sport is going to be a big part of your activities list. You might need to put more information about that in the additional information section of the Common Application. You could consider a lengthier resume, also talking with coaches, and possibly some extra pieces in an athletic supplement that you can use on SlideRoom or in another format. What's the minimum SAT score to keep in mind is the next question. I really can't answer that question in such a general way, because that one is relative to the schools you're interested in. I'd say for almost every student, I start with a goal literally of getting at least the 500 across the 3 sections, which, believe it or not, is going to qualify you for a giant group of colleges in the US. However, from there, it's anything goes. The most competitive colleges, the median SAT sections today are in the 740, 750 range, and the ACT is up around a 34 out of 36. So those are very high, 97, 8, 9th percentile scores, not easy to get. And, you know, as I said, SAT, ACT are more important in some schools, less important in others. And that's where you should set your bar, as well as looking at your own abilities as to what's realistic to hope for. Does FAFSA take into account which universities an applicant is applying to when they decide how much aid is awarded? The answer to that is no. What FAFSA does, that's the free application for federal student aid, is it provides a student aid report that details for all the colleges that you're applying to. It gives every college equally an EFC, which is the expected family contribution. It's what the federal government formula says you should expect to pay or be expected to pay as a family. Let's say your expected family contribution is $30,000 per year. If you then apply to a $60,000 a year private college and get in, you would have $60,000 minus $30,000 of expected family contribution and $30,000 left over as need. At that point, the college will decide whether to fund that need and how to do so. And that's where you'll see the differences. In some cases, the colleges won't even fund anything close to the expected aid that you're thinking you'll get. In other cases, you'll get an extremely generous award. So no, the FAFSA doesn't really do that. Many families, when they do the calculators or actually get their SAR, the student aid report back, are quite understandably surprised when the government says, well, you're expected to pay X, and you're thinking that's impossible, we can never pay that. That's one of the things that's often a surprise and why you should start planning early and do some of these calculators. The next question, what do you think gives the most financial aid to colleges? Entering scholarships or getting a part-time job? Not exactly sure what that question's trying to get to. In terms of balancing your time, to get to Brooke's question here, having a part-time job can be helpful to show schools responsibility and to put some money away so that you'll have some flexibility in helping to pay for your college costs. Colleges will look first at a student's savings, typically, more than parent savings, when calculating your ability to pay for school. So 20 to 25% of your savings account is going to be expected to go each year to your college costs. So they'll hit that pretty hard. It doesn't mean you shouldn't save, but they will hit that hard. The largest amount of aid beyond need-based financial aid that you'll get is usually based off of academic ability. So doing super well in your academics with your GPA and getting high test scores if you can is the most likely scenario to help you open up merit scholarships, which I would bet are probably going to be worth more than you'll actually save, depending on your work. For most students, if you can open up a $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 merit scholarship a year, that's a pretty significant amount of money over a 4-year college degree. The next question, been inconsistent with the types of activities I participate in through high school, but this is because I was trying to figure out skills and interests. Would this reflect poorly on my ability to make commitments? That's a great question. And gets at this notion of consistency and also learning about your strengths. I think that kind of question itself is important. I think a lot of schools will respect a student for that kind of testing out and exploration. And again, are going to look at your development through junior and senior year as to what you're doing and whether you've now found some things you're super interested in. And it'll be your job as you're looking at the colleges to try to elaborate more on how you got there and what your interests are now. So you don't look like you're just drifting all around. Sometimes an essay, a discussion that tries to draw through the thread of your exploration and what you've learned and kind of how you've evolved, that can actually be quite helpful for colleges to get a sense of your thinking and your development. So that's a great question. And again, I tend to see a lot of that. And the key question is, where does it leave you? You know, what did you learn from your activities, your work, and the things that you've gotten involved in? Other questions, please do send in here. Looking through, I don't want to repeat myself at all. A next question that I often do get as well is, you know, at what point should you start writing your applications, getting involved in that stuff? Seniors clearly need to be working on this right now, but the juniors, a lot of what I mentioned, and obviously earlier students, it's not something you need to focus on at the moment. But seniors need to work on this now, and if you do apply to one or more schools, early decision or early action, you do need to finish the rest of your applications while you're waiting for the answers. So one of the big myths about early decision or early action is once you apply, you can just wait and you don't need to do anything until you hear back. I think that's a huge mistake. Most schools do their announcements December 15th, and I don't know anybody that really is going to do a great job between December 16th and January 1 or January 15 writing their applications. So the time to start writing is during the summer before senior year. If you can finish the common application and a few supplements over the next week or two, you're going to really help yourself out a lot as you get into senior fall. If you can then, one by one, get through the rest of your applications while you're waiting or just working on regular decision, you're going to be a lot happier come beginning of December. So do get moving. Another question just came, what do juniors need to worry about right now for college? So juniors, you're in an interesting position. This would be rising juniors. You are literally halfway through high school. And it may not seem like it to some degree because we're already talking about end game. But you've got 2 years of high school behind you, and you have junior and senior year ahead of you. And for most colleges, it's the second half of high school that's actually more important from the admissions decision standpoint than the first half of college. So the main thing juniors need to be thinking about is great grades in the good curriculum this year and next year. If you start off the first week or two of school and you feel you are over-challenged or under-challenged or not in the right courses, make a change now. Most schools will allow you, most high schools will allow you to change a class or two potentially early in the year without it going on your transcript. So be aware that you might want to make some changes. Sometimes that's involuntary when a school cancels a class or can offer something or adds something new. The other thing you should be doing, if you haven't started already as a junior, is putting into place a standardized testing preparation plan. That doesn't mean you need to work with a one-on-one tutor from now until June, but you should have a plan in place so that you are working on your testing, have a set schedule that you're working toward, and then being flexible as you start to get your test scores back. The first test you're going to hit is the PSAT in October, and I would break the ice for that, get to know the PSAT a little bit. Don't stress or worry about it. It's a 98th, 99th percentile score that's going to get you into the National Merit Scholarship Competition. In other words, a very difficult 205, 215 level score after you add the sections up. So the idea is really to just have a reasonable go at the PSAT in October, but don't worry about it too much. Some colleges are using that to mark it off of as well. So if you do pretty well, it can lead to a lot of communication with schools. The other thing juniors should be doing now is research. Starting to think about your strengths, to get back to the earlier steps, your interests, and looking for schools that might be a good fit for you to learn more about them. And then starting to get some visiting in perhaps a couple of schools if you haven't already to break the ice during junior fall. Another question, this might be the last one. Do the credentials of a recommender have a heavy influence? For example, a letter from a professor as opposed to a high school teacher, assuming they both say the same things. That's an interesting question. Most cases, colleges really do want to see 2 high school academic teachers, and they want to see people that really have seen you in the classroom, usually junior year and or senior year, although that might be hard in terms of applying earlier in the year, senior year. Sometimes credentials matter, all things being equal. If they're going to write the same thing and you've got someone that's really a high-level person who knows you well, and you did super well in the class, that could be a reason to have a professor from a summer program or something. But I think most colleges would lean toward your full year high school teacher, maybe see that professor as a third kind of supplemental recommendation on the Common App rather than a substitute. Credentials typically aren't as important as really getting a sense that a teacher knows you and can talk about your contributions and learning in the class. Sometimes if you have a professor or some other high-level person who has a particular connection to one college, you could use that person and ask them to write a letter just to that specific school outside of the Common App process, but to send something directly to the college they're connected to or that they know. How do you promote that you're in the National Honor Society? The main thing is it's going to go on the academic honors and awards section in the Common Application. Some students will also put it in the activities list and then detail what you've done as part of National Honor Society. If it's really a big activity and involvement for you, some schools have started to add back, Dartmouth and Columbia and some others have added back in what used to be called the old meaningful activity short answer question. It's a block of about 150 to 200 words that asks you to elaborate on an activity that you've been involved in. And so if you want to promote that more, you can choose to write about it in that short answer, or perhaps even in your main essay. So again, the presentation process is asking you to shine the flashlight here or there and tell the colleges for you what's the most important thing that they should be focusing on when they're getting to know you. So think about the takeaway as a whole of your common application or individual college application in terms of where you're writing, what's going first or last on your activities list, what's going in the supplemental questions, and so on. So I'll leave you with a cartoon here that we've used a lot. Don't lose your sense of humor about the college process. And thanks to everybody for joining in.